I think in 2 days we produce more data today than data that's been produced since the beginning of time to the year 2003. So that's the transformation of a sort of analog human world to suddenly us creating a very rich digital world. In fact, that's the reason, I've written a book that we're going to talk about on Sunday about machine learning and the creative arts. But the reason that machine learning, why algorithms are able to mutate, change, and adapt to become so powerful is it's a little bit like an algorithm in the past was a child that was not given anywhere to play. And so, of course, it doesn't develop language, it doesn't develop intelligence. Now we suddenly have such a rich digital environment that there's a world for algorithms to go and play in, many visuals tagged by us, and this is why suddenly machine learning, which is an idea very much several decades ago, has suddenly become possible because there is this rich digital world which we're creating for free. We don't realize that, in fact, we give data away.
So data, so sort of big data is one of the issues. John, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my one-word answer to what should we worry about is China. Because there, if you read the Chinese, it's freely published, the State Plan for Machine Learning and Artificial Intelligence, it's imagining a world in which these new techniques are used for complete surveillance, complete control. And it explicitly mentions pensions, healthcare, judicial systems, educational systems, and obviously the police force and security system. China has a computer system called Skynet that processes 1.4 billion faces through its system, and it's linked to a police computer that uses health records of things like takeaway deliveries, everywhere people have moved, everywhere their movements are tracked by facial recognition. And it's explicitly imagining this is a new form of state control. And that's the worst case scenario of where the trends in this extraordinary slipstream of data that we all generate, combined with the arriving new discoveries in machine learning and artificial intelligence, expansion of computer power added to facial recognition. And we don't have to imagine the dystopian outcome of it because it's already present in a place like Xinjiang, where you have algorithmic processes used to identify, in quotes, radicals for, attending mosque too often, things like that, for having children with Islamic names, and for, in the case of one instance, a publisher of Uyghur language texts who was jailed because the books he'd printed had too low a percentage of Chinese original words. And out of a population of 12 million Uyghurs, you have 1.5 million who are currently in or have spent time in re-education camps. So the possible worst-case outcome for this isn't something we have to imagine. It's something that's already here, and we have to think about what the implications are for us and how we act to prevent it.
So, that actually leads to one of my next questions, because one of the interesting things, you just cited China as a possible worst-case scenario. My understanding, and I could be wrong, is that the Chinese are not as concerned about this stuff at the moment as many people are in the West. Like, one of the things I wanted to ask Jaspreet is a lot of the sort of anxiety around tech and concerns about tech seem largely, not only, but largely to be emanating from the US and Europe at the moment. And I wanted to ask you, Jaspreet, because you've worked in India, A, whether you agree with that, and B, whether there are other concerns in India, but also if you care to comment more generally in the non-Western world, just to add, like, we hear a lot about this notion of the great decoupling, where sort of China is developing its own internet and heading down its own path, which would suggest that some of the anxieties that might emerge would also be different.
Okay, thanks, Akash. Three points broadly in answer to the question you asked, and taking off from what first Marcus said about privacy, and then what John talked about China. Now, first of all, I agree with you. Privacy is not as big a deal in India, culturally, as it is in the Western world. So, if you're in an elevator, for example, there's no concept of space, and therefore privacy. You're sitting in a train, and the first thing they're going to ask you is, how much is your salary? Okay, so the concept of privacy in India is very different from the concept of privacy in the Western world. And so, very frankly, for 5 rupees, I'm going to sell my privacy and my information and my data. And that's rarely been the case. And so the Indian concern in the Indian customer, consumer, person does not really come from that my privacy is getting invaded, but it has started coming because we have started seeing how data can actually move things which influence you at a very basic level. Elections, for example, okay, or the polarization, of the society in general, and how much are all these different social networks and WhatsApp and everything that also in the end use your data and kind of communicate so simply with each other, how that's going to... And so I think the concerns here, and then, people stealing your money because they can get into your accounts, etc., is I think the bigger concern rather than my privacy getting invaded. That's one. 2 is, very frankly, I think the Chinese culture is also very similar. Okay, in the sense that they don't really care that much about privacy. And then then added to the fact that they're the party and the government reigns supreme. And so one of the reasons why this quote-unquote decoupling and where China is kind of coming in is because China has this massive fount of data, which has really no regulation on it. Okay, and so huge number of phones, 1.5 billion people, everyone even paying alms to a beggar using mobile payments, and therefore the data which is kind of coming out, and then you can do so much with it. And so these data-first companies which are getting born in China, frankly, no other country has a hope to replicate those. And why this decoupling bit is real is that if you kind of go back into history, and we've had lots of sessions on geopolitics today, for example, the West built itself on 2 or 3 large things. The ocean trade, for example. But one of those large things was oil, and just owning oil. Now, you've heard this concept of data being the new oil. In fact, I disagree. Oil, frankly, was nothing in its power compared to what data has. And there are many other reasons why data is far, far, far more powerful than oil ever was.